Here we go. I'm on Zoom, and we are waiting for SherriMcKeon. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She is the administrator of the illustrious Facebook group, Sam Vaknin's Party Boat of Harsh Truths. I hope I got this one right. At any rate, I'm going to post a link to the Facebook group in the description of the resulting video. So here's Sherri coming on board. Here she is, next to the library. Sherri, you may wish to start recording and we can get...
Good morning.
All right, we are both recording just in case. Sherri is next to a library, so it's a good place to be.
Yes, good internet here. It's snowing, so I wanted to make sure I had a good internet connection.
Good internet helps with Zoom, yes, indeed.
So the whole point of this meeting is to answer questions from our Facebook group. So I'd like to do a few formalities and introduce you and introduce myself. I am one of the group administrators for the Facebook groups called Sam Vaknin's Party Boat of Harsh Truths, which was founded by Haley Martin. And you, of course, are Sam Vaknin, author of Malignant Self-Love. I got my copy right here. Narcissism Revisited, and you have many other honors of being a member of editorial board of Psychiatry Journal, visiting professor of psychology of Southern Federal University, Rostov-on-Don, Russia, professor of psychology at CIAPS, Center for International Advanced Professional Studies, and you have a website that is very, very interesting, samvac.tripod.com, among many, many other things. So our group has posted many, many questions for you on the topics that you're an expert at, and I would like to pose them to you if you are ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the plug for the book. I have written it, but I have yet to read it. It's too long, 720 pages. Yeah.
We are slowly working our way through it in our book review in our group. We go through a few pages at a time every week.
Thank you.
And we're trying to examine every little detail of that book. It's very,
I appreciate
very good.
your interest. Thank you for having me. And I'm at your disposal.
Well, I'd like to start with a few questions that I basically copied and pasted straight from the page. One is from Cheryl Wright. She asks, why would a narcissist look at themselves in the mirror while they're ranting on the phone or in the middle of an argument?
Well, it sounds like a simplistic question, but it is not, because the answer comprises the two strands that put together form the core pathology of narcissism. And the first strand is, of course, that the narcissist has no self, does not exist. The narcissist is an absence, not a presence. At the narcissist's core, there's a void, there's an emptiness, howling deep space. That's not Sam Vaknin, by the way, that's Otto Kernberg. Otto Kernberg is the father of the field of personality disorders. So the narcissist needs to remind himself all the time that he exists, which you and healthy people don't have to. Neurotypicals don't have to remind themselves that they exist. The narcissist does. Narcissism is a constant streak of self-doubt. Do I exist really? So this is the source of the compulsion to obtain narcissistic supply. A crucial aspect of narcissistic supply is the affirmation by the sources of supply. Yes, you do exist. You know, you're there, there's somebody there. So looking at the mirror has this function. Second reason to look at the mirror is grandiosity, of course. The narcissist is an actor. When he looks at the mirror, while he's ranting, for example, he admires his defiance, his aggression, the fact that he is about to prevail and conquer and triumph, the sadistic aggression that he inflicts on his interlocutor. He admires all this. He admires himself. So looking in the mirror has two functions: affirmation of existence, substantiating one's existence, and substantiating in a way that buttresses and enhances the underlying grandiosity.
That is very interesting. I have another question from Lady A. Would you consider doing an in-depth series on covert narcissism, the behaviors, manifestations, outcomes, as the pandemic of narcissism rages on, fueled by social media and gaming? It's possible that covert narcissists will be center stage for this stretch of the plague. Thank you for considering my request. And I would like to add that you have extensive videos already on this topic, but
there's a twist of the pandemic here, so
yes,
we'll still countenance the question. Yeah, there's well over 6 hours on my YouTube channel, 6 hours dedicated to covert narcissism, which I think is more than sufficient. There is an analysis of the initial construct, the first time that covert narcissism was proposed as a diagnosis by Akhtar and Cooper. Cooper just died a few months ago. So these were giants of the study of narcissism, and they came up with the idea of covert narcissism. Now, during the pandemic, it is very difficult to obtain explicit narcissistic supply, overt narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply does require face-to-face interaction, some forms of intimacy, for example, in somatic narcissism, etc., etc. So the pandemic is hard on overt classic narcissists, but it is equally hard on covert narcissists, because covert narcissists obtain their supply, their narcissistic and sadistic supply, usually via other narcissists, teaming up with a powerful figure, by becoming a fan or an acolyte of a guru, by joining a church and then becoming a pillar of the community, etc., etc. So they also need access to unwitting victims, shall we say. And they leverage other people's activities and to obtain narcissistic supply, because the main feature of a covert narcissist is the vulnerability, the fragility, the shyness. The covert narcissist is too timid to just openly go ahead and solicit supply, or if he cannot solicit supply, coerce other people to provide him with supply. He's simply too timid. He has social anxiety. He is shy. So he has to do it vicariously, surreptitiously, underground. He is very subtle in the bad sense of the word. He's Machiavellian. That's why we have today we have the dark tetrad, not the dark triad, which is obsolete. Today we have the dark tetrad, where the fourth leg is actually covert narcissists and borderlines. So covert narcissist uses Machiavellianism to obtain narcissism and to obtain psychopathic outcomes. And you can't do this really via Zoom. I would say that it's easier for an overt narcissist to obtain supply via Zoom than for a covert narcissist, because covert narcissists work behind the scenes. They are manipulative. They need a lot of time. They invest a lot of time and effort in engineering situations. Social engineering.
Reminds me of a lot of people that sit outside of stores handing out masks to people who need masks, entering the stores out of the kindness of their heart. I often wonder, that's an awful lot of generosity and time and investment to give to people on a certain very particular issue that they know they can get a lot of attention through that. And that's often made me wonder, why would people spend their day outside of a store handing out masks
I
to
just
people?
released a video a few minutes ago on victimhood movements. The key feature, the thing that distinguishes, the issue that distinguishes proper generosity, charitableness, kindness, attentiveness from the pathological kinds, the malignant kinds, is the ostentation.
Huh.
If these acts are carried out ostentatiously, not necessarily publicly, you can act in public and not be ostentatious. But
Right.
if you do it so that you're noticed, and if the
Yeah.
emphasis is on being noticed, and when you're not noticed, you stop doing it, or you begin to undermine, to sabotage the effort,
Yeah.
then you're acting out of narcissistic reasons or motivations. And so there's a lot of this in victimhood movements, social justice movements, on the right and on the left. Don't misunderstand. I'm not, there's a lot of this going on the
So
ostentation.
is there an effective way to put guardrails on your movement, or to safeguard against being strong-armed by this kind of like cluster B leadership taking over? Is there?
Well, if they gained access to the levers of power, you're screwed.
Yeah,
Simple.
because
Because
once they get
the
a hold,
state,
they're going to hang on.
yeah, I mean, social institutions, starting with the nation state and ending with your boss. Social institutions monopolize violence. Our entire society, that's not Sam Vaknin, that's Adam Smith. Our
Huh.
entire society is founded on the monopoly of violence. Only the state can kill you with impunity or send you to kill with
Huh.
impunity. Only your boss can harangue you or, lash out at you or abuse you. You can't do that because he has the power to fire you. This asymmetry of power, asymmetry of violence, asymmetry of aggression is the main instrument of narcissists, covert narcissists, psychopaths, and borderlines in certain circumstances when borderlines shift and become secondary psychopaths.
So that reminds me of a saying, like somebody is the face of a movement. A certain person is associated with a certain movement, possibly by allowing multiple people to be the face of a movement. That would spread out the control of the movement, and maybe that would be an indicator of allowing more people to have an equal say in a
Oh,
movement.
well, there are two problems with that. Narcissists and psychopaths are far better at being the face of anything.
Hmm.
They're charming, they are outgoing, they are
Yeah.
very good, they have good verbal skills, they are showmen, so showmanship, and they cater to the media's need to the media's need to monetize eyeballs.
Huh.
They increase advertising revenues when they appear on Facebook. And YouTube. So narcissists and psychopaths have an inbuilt, hardwired relative advantage, competitive edge in today's environment and society. We had constructed an ambience, a civilization that caters to the needs of psychopaths and narcissists because they produce something which can be easily converted into money and power. And that something is attention. They are masters of attention. What is narcissism? Narcissism is high level expertise at acquiring attention, storing it, manipulating it. Same with psychopaths. They're goal oriented. They want
The
sex.
showman, yes, the showman of the circus.
So you can't
Yes.
have many faces because narcissists and psychopaths do it much better. Trump was
Huh.
a media darling long before he became president of the United States. So
Yeah.
they do it better. They
It
do
was like
this
a
better.
pipeline. Yeah.
And you
The
have, I
pipeline.
said Donald Trump, don't misunderstand. Martin Luther King, same. I mean, a media showman, utter psychopath, by the way. If you listen to the FBI recordings, the secret recordings of Martin Luther King in his hotel rooms, grandiose narcissistic psychopath, but a great showman. And so I'm not
Yeah.
like left-leaning or right-leaning. I have written an article about Barack Obama when he was a senator,
Yeah.
saying that he's a narcissist. And I've written an article, I've granted an interview to American Thinker about Donald Trump, when he himself did not even imagine that he could be president. He didn't even run for office. I mean, didn't even join the
Yeah, I
primaries.
saw that. Yeah.
So I'm like equal opportunity abuser, equal opportunity diagnostician.
Wow, that is
All
amazing.
these people that come to the limelight are suspect.
Huh.
They are suspect by definition, ipso facto. The very fact that they end up in the limelight, and this includes people, gurus like Jordan Peterson and Sadhguru, they're all suspect.
Huh.
Because ostentation, conspicuousness, being noticed as a main feature of activity, this is suspect, and more than suspect.
So about your treatment, I have a good question here about your cold therapy treatment by Emily Smith. She asks, if cold therapy is an effective treatment for NPD, what would be an effective treatment for BPD, borderline personality disorder? Is there one? Have you invented one? If not, would you recommend one? And as a little follow-up, she asked, would you suggest narcissists pair with borderline since they're naturally attracted to each other? And she says in recovery, I think she's referring to like in 12-step recovery programs, but often like they say in those programs, don't date in the first year of your recovery, but
in all rehab, not only in 12 steps, in all rehab. I used to be a consultant to one of the major rehab centers in the United States for 10 years. I know the field very well. So I can answer questions about addictions and so on if you have any there. But as to this question, there are two major differences between borderline and narcissism, and one commonality. The commonality is grandiosity. Both borderlines and narcissists are grandiose, but people with borderline, men and women with borderline, have access to empathy and have access to emotions. The problem actually that they have too many emotions and too much of their emotion. They can't regulate their emotions. They have emotional dysregulation. And they are empathic. That's not a pretense, like in the case of the narcissist. Narcissists can imitate and emulate empathy, but they're not empathic. There's no inner resonance. There's nothing there. It's an act. Not so with the borderline. The borderline is really empathic. Her empathy actually drives the borderline to dread abandonment. She is abandonment anxiety driven. So no treatment would be equally applicable to narcissists and borderlines. They have too much separating them. So borderline is very, very effectively treated with dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, very effectively. And the excellent news is that if you just wait until you're 45, in 50% of the cases, the borderline spontaneously disappears. 50% of all people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder heal spontaneously after age 45. Another 50% can be treated perfectly with DBT. Put together, it is possible to eradicate borderline as we did with measles. That's not the case with narcissism. Now, cold therapy, just to make clear, because I don't want to create any type of hype, and I already see hype here there. Cold therapy eliminates the false self. That's the only thing it does. It does not restore empathy or teach empathy, which is an impossibility.
That helps with grandiosity? Does that help with grandiosity?
Yes, that's the false self is the repository of grandiosity. So it removes the false self. Therefore, from that moment on, the narcissist doesn't need narcissistic supply anymore at all. And so but everything else remains. The lack of empathy, the exploitativeness, the lack of positive emotionality, for example, inability to love, etc., etc. All this remains. The only thing is he doesn't need other people to tell him how great he is and what a genius he is. That's all. And his false self. So he has no firewall, he has no protection. And in this restricted sense, he becomes for a while borderline. Because once I remove the false self, there's a very brief period, usually a week or two, where he technically becomes extremely dysregulated borderline. Now, 11% of people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder commit suicide owing to emotional dysregulation. And that's a major risk in cold therapy. Suicide risk. Suicidal ideation is not very common, universal in cold therapy. So the first phase is very dangerous. It has to be, one-on-one, etc. Last part of this compounded question. Do I recommend to narcissists and borderlines to be together? Well, they are attracted to each other for all the wrong reasons. They're attracted to each other because their pathologies resonate. Not only that, but their pathologies enhance each other, amplify each other. They become more sick inside their relationship. That's again, not some Vaknin. That is Joanne Lachkar. Joanne Lachkar, my good personal friend, who had written the first book ever on borderline narcissistic couples in 1983. So
I noticed that often narcissists and psychopaths pair up also, whereas the psychopath tends to victimize the narcissist actually because they can maneuver a little bit better emotionally around the narcissist. But I don't know if that would be ideal. I mean, essentially, most narcissists I've seen end up alone in their golden years, you might say, because they pushed everybody away or whatever, and they seem relatively happy on their own. I don't know about the case with the borderlines. If they've recovered, maybe it would be different, but that's interesting. Well, I have another one from Anne Marie Gover. Given your observation that psychopathy and narcissism tends to emerge in critical mass with the expansion of Western civilization, how is it looking these days? This is another COVID question. With the complicating factors of COVID, are we getting better at moderating the self in society or worse?
well, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. The recent statistics published by the National Institutes of Mental Health in the United States, for example, in the United Kingdom, in Israel, in many places. Well over 50 countries have published mental health statistics. The picture is unequivocal. Mental health has undergone a veritable supernova. Mental health illness has undergone a veritable supernova. Well over 34% of American adults are now clinically diagnosed with major depression and anxiety disorders. 20% are at risk, suicide risk. Suicides have skyrocketed. Substance abuse has skyrocketed. Murder rates have doubled or tripled depending on the city, etc., etc. The picture is utterly unequivocal.
Yeah, here in the Midwest, like the opioid epidemic is even worse.
Yeah.
I've seen that in my own community. It's just getting worse and worse. It's definitely not getting any better in that regard.
Yeah, these are the statistics. It's not a matter for speculation. And the question is, what will happen after the pandemic is over? We have a precedent in 1920 when the Spanish flu was over. And we have another precedent in the 14th century, in 1349, when the Black Death was over in continental Europe. And we saw what happened then. And what happens then, there's a period of exuberance, of letting go, of casual sex, of flippancy, of levity, of non-commitment, non-investment, a period of regression to infancy, in effect, a period of renouncing all chores, roles, and responsibilities as an adult. And then this period ends usually extremely badly, extremely badly. In Europe, it ended with a series of wars and plagues, which have lasted well over 300 years. In the United States, of course, it ended with the Great Depression, which was a direct result of this behavior, direct result of this kind of behavior. After this pandemic, we may experience a similar thing, an economic bubble coupled with total disintegration of social institutions such as the family or sexual exclusivity, I am not an optimist. I'm not an optimist in this case, because where it all leads is to narcissism as the solution, and psychopathy is the solution. Already you see academics saying Well, narcissism and psychopathy are not so bad. We need narcissistic politicians. We need psychopathic chief executive officers. They have new names: high functioning narcissists, productive narcissists. They're glorifying narcissism. In July 2016, there was a cover story in New Scientist, cover story. Parents, teach your children to be narcissists, because that's the new adaptation. And I'm very afraid that the pandemic will make this much, much worse. Because the pandemic, as opposed to the Spanish, as distinct from the Spanish flu, the pandemic has not been our finest hour. It did not bring us together. It split us even further.
Well, that's interesting about transitioning between the pandemic to the non-pandemic aftermath. The next question is about narcissism transitioning by Raven Poe. Dear
What? I'm sorry?
DSP.
Narcissism transition? Narcissism transition?
Yeah, her question is, among the many things that continue to astound me about my formerly diagnosed narcissistic husband is making a scene, leaving the house every time. What is it with narcissists on not being able to just collect themselves and the items they need and say bye? And I would say that I've noticed that too, that there seems to be a transition period problem where going from one situation to another seems to be kind of sticky. Like it's hard for them to move on and change their mindset and move into a new mindset. And I was thinking that her comment there about her husband seems to remind me of this COVID situation where the narcissists have their like grip on their what conspiracy theory or whatever, their movement they're joining or whatever. And then aftermath of a COVID, where are they going to go? How are they going? They're not going to be able to transition. Probably similar to the comment she's making about her husband.
Mm-hmm. Well, the role of drama in borderline and in narcissism, there's a different role. In borderline, drama is control technique. It's a control strategy. The borderline generates drama, creates drama where there's none, introduces drama into totally tranquil and well-functioning situations. And so, and she uses drama to create uncertainty, because within uncertainty, she thrives and flourishes. She's in possession of the full information, so she can manipulate people around her. The borderline and the histrionic, by the way, they use drama as a control strategy or tactic. The narcissist creates drama for entirely different reasons. Drama provides him with closure. Narcissists transition between pathological narcissistic spaces. When the shared fantasy is over in a romantic relationship, when you are fired in a workplace, when you have lost your company to bankruptcy proceedings or liquidation, in short, when your pathological narcissistic space is gone, you need to move on and create a new pathological narcissistic space. Pathological narcissistic space is usually a physical space, or at most a digital space, like cyberspace. And within this space, all the fans and sycophants and acolytes and admirers and followers of the narcissist congregate to offer him narcissistic supply. So it could be the neighborhood pub, could be the neighborhood pub, could be church, could be a club, could be a workplace, could be a family. So that's a space. But when you have to abandon the space because it's gone defunct, because people see through you, wizened up to your stratagems, won't give you supply anymore. You must move on because supply is critical. So you need to close the gate. You need closure. You need to cut it off surgically. That's the first purpose of the drama. And the second purpose of the drama is grandiosity, self-aggrandizement. Is whatever the narcissist does is of cosmic significance, is unprecedented, is amazing, is unique. He can't just pack his things and go because a million other Joes are doing this. He has to do it in a way that will be memorable.
Oh, that's so true.
He lives for posterity. I mean, his abandonment will be remembered for generations to come and memorized in sagas and HBO series, Game of Thrones season 19 or something. So the drama is part of grandiosity and closure, to make a clean cut so that he can dedicate all his energies. He knows he has nowhere to go back to. Part of the drama, one of the main reasons for the drama is to burn the bridges so that he knows he cannot go back and he just must move forward. Now, we must distinguish burning the bridges from hoovering. There's two separate things. Burning the bridges has to do with the pathological narcissistic space. But you can still burn the bridges and hoover a specific individual that used to belong to the space. So you can transition an individual from a previous space to your current space via hoovering.
That's interesting. Huh. Well, I have another question here. It's anonymous. Dr. Vaknin, what are your thoughts on anti-natalist philosophical worldviews? And I gotta admit, I did not Google anti-natalist. I'm not familiar with that term.
No problem.
Is that another movement, like a
movement that says that you should not have children?
Oh, okay.
Anti-natalism is comprised of two mutually exclusive philosophies. The first philosophy is pragmatic in the philosophical tradition of the United States. So pragmatic. Like, we shouldn't have children because resources are limited, we are polluting the planet, there's a lot of crime, drugs, institutions are disintegrating, there's a pandemic, da. So, like, there are many practical reasons to not have children. So this is the pragmatic, in the philosophical sense, pragmatic school. And there's a moral school. And the moral school in anti-natalism says you should not have children because it's immoral to have children. If you bring more children to the world, first of all, you impact their future. You're bringing children into a nightmare. You're bringing children into the swamp, to use the big thinker Trump. You're bringing children into inevitable calamity, apocalypse. It's not fair to the children. It's not moral to do this. This has to do with your own gratification, narcissistic perhaps. And also, it's not moral towards other already existing human beings. Because if you bring children to the world, you're polluting the planet, you're depleting resources, you're creating hunger and etc., famine, and so on. So there's a moral school and a pragmatic school. I happen to support both. I think bringing children to the world at this particular moment in history is a seriously bad idea and arguably immoral. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I have another question from Ginger Coy. I've had many interesting conversations with her. She says, Professor Vaknin, I'm intrigued about your thoughts that we know nothing about the brain and that correlating the amygdala to the fear center of the brain, for instance, is reductive. And you wrote in an Instagram that few, if any, theories of psychology are supported by modern day brain research. Can you say more on the state of neuroscience, psychology, and psychoanalysis as opposed to psychotherapy? So I know this is like one of your favorite topics about how little we know about the brain. I've heard that your many videos on this topic.
Yeah, I think it's very grandiose to claim such knowledge of the brain that allows us to hypothesize, let alone give medication to people.
And they found so much with the intestines producing hormones, and so many other parts of the body.
There are many, they've just discovered the biggest structure in the brain 10 years ago. The biggest structure in the brain was unknown until 10 years ago. We just discovered that the bulk of biochemicals which regulate moods and so on and so forth are produced actually in the intestines, and that the intestines have technically something which would qualify as a second brain, etc. It's good, of course, it's laudable to study the brain, to do it, but humility, a little humility. There's no humility in the sciences That's why people reject expertise. That's why they reject authority. That's why they revert to the occult and I don't know what, because science has failed them, has betrayed them in its outcomes, like the nuclear bomb or thalidomide, or whatever. So has failed them, even as it claimed to be infallible.
Yeah.
So science had become a religion, and people say, well, I prefer the original, I prefer Jesus Christ. I don't want Fauci. I want Jesus Christ.
In some of the most basic systems, like in plants, the leaves are like the lungs and the roots are like the intestines. And in plants, often the roots do produce most of the hormones that control and regulate the plant. So even in the most basic biological systems, it's more or less the intestines type structures that regulate the whole production of everything.
I'm not saying that I know. I'm saying we don't know. We don't know. And owing to our hubris, to our grandiosity, we, for instance, we've been giving people medications for 50 years, antidepressants. That's a crime, simply a crime, because we don't have the slightest idea, the slightest. There's a second problem, and that is a problem of what comes before what. For example, it is true that when you're afraid, the amygdala is hyperactive. We have functional magnetic resonance imaging and we see the blood flows. Well, I say we because I teach neuroscience and I have a medical degree. So we see the blood flow in the amygdala and we know it's hyperactivated. When you store long-term memories, that's the hippocampus. We see in the hippocampus. So we know these things, but hey, what created what? Did your fear create the activity in the amygdala? Or did the activity in the amygdala create your fear? Or is it a third unrelated thing?
Yeah.
For example, your gut bacteria, which had created the fear and the activity in the amygdala. I'm just, giving a crazy example.
Yeah.
We don't know. I'm not saying that I know. I'm saying we don't know. And to so seriously sit on television and say, yes, of course the amygdala creates the fear, is to be philosophically ignorant. Not to say that not very wise. So I think we should be humble.
Yeah, another interesting question.
One more comment, with your permission. One more comment to the previous question. People make this distinction between psychotherapy and medication. They say, depression, give medication. Schizophrenia, give medication. Psychotic disorder, medication. And I don't know, borderline, go to therapy. Talk therapy is the exact equivalent of medication. When I talk to you, I'm reaching inside your brain and I'm changing it. I'm absolutely rewiring it. I'm creating new paths. I'm triggering in you cascades of biochemicals. There's no difference between taking an antidepressant and talking to some Vaknin, or to a therapist, Talk therapy is an intervention. Medication is an intervention. And both of them have sometimes identical results, as has been proven in many studies.
That sounds like a great place to make an investment in society that we've lacked an investment previously, especially like with children, helping children with trauma and things along those lines. People often say, well, they'll grow out of it. But really, if you can catch it early, especially with substance abuse, that can greatly benefit the life from there on out for the rest of the person's life. So here's another question for you. Nick Davis asks, do you think it's possible that substance use disorders have been classified incorrectly and may be a type of personality disorder, at least in some cases?
No. Substance use disorder involves substance use abuse, involve external objects that are consumed, and again we are making these unhelpful distinctions, because you can abuse substances which are not on the list. Like, they don't have to be heroin. You can abuse chocolate. Food is a substance.
Yeah.
Where I would take it from there is, for example, I would unify substance abuse disorders and eating disorders. In my view, they all are substance abuse disorders. So again, we make these artificial distinctions. You can drink alcohol, that's okay, but you cannot smoke pot or marijuana or cannabis. That's not okay. You go to jail. There are 600,000 people in jail in the United States alone for consuming cannabis, while alcohol, by any measure, is much more potent than any marijuana grown anywhere in the universe, including Afghanistan and Turkey. So we have these crazy things, these double standards, these insanities, which are inexplicable, you know. And the same you see in the DSM. All personality disorders, well, not all, most, well, definitely all cluster B disorders are outcomes of trauma. End of story. If I have to distill 1 year of university teaching, narcissism is outcome of trauma, borderline is outcome of trauma, and today we begin to understand that psychopathy is interaction between genetic and brain abnormalities with trauma. Has to be trauma. Why not unify them with, why not call them post-traumatic conditions? Why do we separate them and call them personality? What the heck is personality? To this very day, I have no idea what is personality. I'm teaching personality in several universities, not only in Russia, but I have no idea what it is. What is it? So what is this thing? You don't know what is personality, and what is personality disorder? But everyone knows what is trauma. Why not call these? And then we discover that victims of trauma actually become borderlines. We discovered that victims with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, complex trauma, Judith Herman's, not Pete Walker, Pete Walker, Judith Herman, there's a difference. So victims of CPTSD are indistinguishable from borderline personality disorder, suddenly we discover. And we're all shocked, amazing, why is it amazing? Borderline is also post-traumatic condition. Narcissism is post-traumatic condition. Then we say, wow, victims of trauma become grandiose and disempathic. It's shocking. Why is it shocking? They react as narcissists do, because they have narcissistic defenses. Everyone exposed to trauma becomes a mini narcissist or a mega narcissist, depending on the trauma. Narcissism is reaction to trauma. That's all. If the trauma is sufficiently horrible and severe, for example, if the child is not allowed to develop boundaries and therefore never becomes an individual, which is the most severe possible form of trauma, then of course the narcissism is lifelong. But if the trauma is brief or short or doesn't attack the identity, then the narcissism will be limited to 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. But there will be narcissism. Most victims of abuse and narcissistic abuse become narcissists and psychopaths. Is not pleasant to say, but it's a fact. Luckily, they transition out of it. It's temporary. It's what we call acquired situation of narcissism. It's temporary, luckily for all of us. But why not put everything together? It's the same thing. It's the same with eating disorders and substance abuse. Food is substance.
In relation to the, like you said, talking to someone, you're reaching into them. Vasif Mamadov, he asked, Professor Vaknin, can you discuss the importance of narrative and its relations with meaning? And I know this is quite important in people that are recovering and post-trauma, to have their narrative formulated of what's going to happen after that. What do you think on that subject?
Well, because our time is limited, even if we do 3 hours, which I'm open to, still our time is limited. I would refer the person who asked this question, I would refer him to the last 7 videos I've made on narrative, meaning, inner dialogue, shadow work, etc., etc.
Do you have a playlist on that? Is that in a playlist?
No, it's just the last few videos.
On your channel?
Last few ones deal exactly with this, narrative, meaning, What is the
Okay.
shadow? Shadow as a narrative, and
Mhm.
deriving meaning as a healing technique. There's a whole video about healing psychotherapies like logotherapy and threat power therapy, a framework. It's called threat power
Mhm.
framework, meaning threat power framework. It's a very new approach to psychotherapy.
Hmm.
So there's a video on this, MTPF. So there's a video on this. I couldn't find any other video online on this. So probably it's the first video ever made on this framework.
Again, you're a trailblazer.
Well, I try to find what's missing. Because,
Hmm.
you know, there's a 2.3 million videos about narcissistic supply, and, you know,
Yeah.
so,
I have an interesting question. This is a lady relating to her own personal experience. Paula Joanne Albers. Hello, Dr. Vaknin. I was in a relationship for 20 years with a man who has most of the criteria of a vulnerable narcissist. Various things happened throughout the years, and before I moved out, and within a space of a week, 3 dangerous things happened to me, my car, and my dog. My question is this: can a vulnerable narcissist be so unsettled that he or she can commit homicide? So that seems like a very personal question that she's curious about. I would think that, you know, there's a spectrum of possibilities that can, depending on how provoked someone is. But I wouldn't think there would be a difference between vulnerable narcissists and overt narcissists. And there,
well, let's start with the fact that when we talk about homicide, and let's call it extreme acts, like extreme weather. When we talk about homicide, infanticide, incest, I mean, we talk about these things. Our consciousness, our language, our narrative, they are dictated by the mass media, by Hollywood, by, you know, talk shows, and so on.
yeah.
It's a fact that anyone can commit homicide. There is no profile, psychological profile of a typical killer. There's no such thing. Given the right circumstances and confluence of stressors, stressful events, triggers, and so on, literally anyone, actually, and everyone, including the person who asked the question, can kill someone.
Hmm.
So this is number one. Number two, if anything, narcissists are less likely to kill anyone because narcissists are pro-social. They're pro-social in the sense that they need other people to regulate their internal environment. They need narcissistic supply, so they alienate their sources of supply, but it takes them decades. I think there's a confusion here between narcissists and psychopaths. Psychopaths are more likely because they are defined, they have no impulse control, they have very high levels of aggression. They are more likely to inflict injury or kill. But interestingly, there is something in this question. Why? Because today we are reconceiving the way we look at borderline personality disorder and covert narcissism. I told you and the viewers that we have transitioned from dark triad to dark tetrad. We've added borderline and so on. Why? Because we today believe that borderline personality disorder is a form of secondary psychopathy in women. It's actually psychopathy. We also believe that covert narcissists can, under certain circumstances, mutate into primary psychopaths. For example, after they drink, under the influence of alcohol. So interestingly, this question is pertinent because covert narcissists, given highly specific circumstances, becomes a psychopath. And then the answer is yes, he is more likely to commit homicide
Oh, that's fascinating.
than an overt narcissist who never becomes a psychopath. Overt narcissist never ever becomes a psychopath. Only
Stressors have a
covert
lot
one.
to do with it. Yeah, it influences. Huh. I also have a question here from Maria Adria. I would like to listen again to a YouTube video called How Narcissists Defeminize You. answering your questions. It's not visible anymore. Is that maybe on a playlist?
Yeah,
About
all the videos that suddenly vanished, with the exception of a few which YouTube took care to delete, all the videos that suddenly had vanished, they were moved to the playlist.
okay.
Now, YouTube is making sure that my videos are not widely watched. I don't want to use the word shadow banned, because there's shadow banning, ghost banning. I don't
Yeah.
believe in them. I don't believe there's, you know, a committee which decides. And I don't believe my importance is such that I would require shadow banning.
A lot of people
But,
think that at YouTube, there's really nobody home at YouTube because they complain to YouTube
well,
and
no,
nothing
there
gets
are,
done.
well, the complaints, of course, are ignored, but there are people making decisions. But the algorithm is constructed to demote automatically, to demote controversial material, material that is perceived as bullying, not conducive to the forming of communities and societies, material that doesn't encourage a lot of commenting, etc., etc. So groups, types of material are demoted, and my materials are explosive. And so on YouTube, for example, this morning, I searched for Sam Vaknin, just the word, just the name, Sam Vaknin. And in the first 500 results, I couldn't find my channel. So they have removed me from search results, and so I understand the question. That's why I keep many videos off the main channel and in playlists. Go to my page, click on playlists, and you'll find many of the missing videos.
Well, that's good to know. Carlito ML says MDD, which I think is major depressive disorder. MDD here, relating the video Healing Through Meaning, Sam remarks depressive narratives contain grandiosity. How is a depressive a grandiose? Because that's an interesting connection you've made.
Yeah. Most depressive disorders, first of all, depression is a family of disorders, of course. There is background depression like dysthymia, cyclothymia. There are major eruptions, volcanic depressions, which are major depressive episodes, and so on. But focusing on major depression. Major depression contains elements which are easily identifiable as a cognitive deficit which amounts together to grandiosity. For example, in major depression, there is a pronounced paranoid streak. There is the feeling that the universe had conspired against you, or your nearest and dearest don't care about you, or there are these, what we call in cognitive behavioral therapy, there are these negative automatic thoughts that are essentially paranoid thoughts. And we are reconceiving of paranoia. I started it, I take credit. We are reconceiving of paranoia now as a form of narcissism. Because the paranoid somehow, however indirectly, considers himself the center of attention. Malevolent attention, malicious attention, malign attention, but still attention. The CIA is after him, so it means he's important, you know? So paranoia is a form of grandiosity, and most majorly depressed people are somehow paranoid. And second thing is catastrophizing. Depression is constructed on catastrophizing. It's the hopelessness of the underlying belief that nothing will ever get better, that there's nothing you can do about it. It's learned helplessness. Nothing you can do about it. So you can do nothing and it's hopeless. But if you look at catastrophizing closely, microscopically, it's an assumption that that's what's happening to you is unprecedented, that the whole course of history in a way is changed somehow, that what with other people will yield the result 2, with you will yield 10. You're special. So a non-depressed person would fail an exam, okay? And the non-depressed person would say, okay, well, I'll try again. I'll go for a second term. A depressed person will fail an exam and would say, oh, this is the end of my career. I will never make a living. So I will not be able to get married. I will not have children. and then I will die in poverty all alone, etc. So with the normal healthy person, it's 2. With the depressive person, it's 10. Drama.
That reminds me of, I'm from Florida, and we would get hurricanes every year, and some people would react to the hurricane like, well, there's nothing we can do, and they would just sit there in a chair and have pop open a beer or something. And other people would put sandbags and board up their house, and they would make little preventative measures of whatever little thing they could afford to do at the time, maybe get a generator. But there was a lot of people that would just be like, oh, there's nothing we could do. And they would just, basically sit out in their yard until the wind would blow their chair away. And it's very interesting how it's very different reactions.
When you say it's like saying, give me your worst. When the depressive says, the worst is going to happen to me, there's something in me. I'm like an end magnet. And this is why I'm dead set against end magnets and all this nonsense. Because this is empaths, this is aggrandizing yourself. It's like making yourself special somehow, even if it's special in a negative way. Narcissists like negative supply. If they don't have supply, negative supply is okay. If you can't love me, hate me. It's okay. You can't hate me. Be afraid of me. It's also okay. Just pay attention to me.
I have a question here. Felicia Saunders asks, how do you heal past trauma if you cannot remember what happened? I find this for myself in dissociative states, but live with some horrible effects of what has happened from the past. And I noticed that I react in a post-traumatic way, the way, and also like soldiers coming back, they hear a backfire of a car and they duck like as if it's gunfire. If they don't actually remember the event, especially in childhood, how do you heal from that?
First of all, we learn about the existence of past trauma from its manifestations and symptoms and presenting signs in the present.
And that's how we know it's happened at all.
That's how we assume. It's one possible explanation, mind you. There are many others. One possible explanation, that there's been a trauma that's been repressed or denied or sliced off, dissociated. And the energy of this trauma is still working in the unconscious. Freud released this energy. This is called in psychoanalysis abreaction. He said, the trauma is there, it's working, it's bad. I'm going to bring the trauma to the consciousness, I'm going to make it conscious. I'm going to bring it to the surface so that all the energy, explosive energy in the trauma will erupt. And this is what we call abreaction. So this is a very old notion, very old concept. The traumas cannot be remembered, and you have to remember them for your healing to start. But here's the problem. The problem is the problem of false memories. We don't have any tool to tell if memories that surface are real, if they're false, if they're mixture, composites, if they are narratives, parts of some plot or story, if they are the outcomes of the influence of peers and the environment. This happens in juries. That's why juries are sequestered. Because human memory is the most unreliable thing after the federal government. We first of all forget half of everything within a day. Then we forget 90% of everything within a year. Not only do we forget, which is okay, but we refuse to admit that we forget. So we invent. We confabulate. We bridge the gaps with all kinds of nonsense. And then we are emotionally invested in this nonsense, in these lies and confabulations. And so we begin to believe it ourselves. We become very aggressive if we are challenged. And so it's a very murky area. There was a woman called Loftus, a scholar called Loftus, Elizabeth Loftus, and she had demonstrated chillingly, that you can convince anyone to remember anything, including very traumatic unbelievable events. 90% of people who had witnessed firsthand 9/11 after 1 year were interviewed. They got wrong. They got wrong almost everything. Where they were, what they did, what they were wearing, everything. This is like, assassination of JFK. You're supposed to not forget.
Yeah.
You do. So it's a huge problem. Memory recall, memory jogging, memory, in trauma treatment is very controversial because we don't have a way to tell.
Well, in relating to the healing process, Barbara Bridges asks, what do you think about the role of forgiveness in the healing process? And she specifically says for narcissistic abuse victims. And what is that forgiveness in relation to healthy boundaries?
Well, first of all, don't confuse forgiving with forgetting.
Right. Okay.
You can forgive and never forget. Second thing, honestly, I think it's much more important to forgive oneself than the perpetrator. Because I don't subscribe to the school. I didn't know what was happening to me. There were no red flags, no warning signs. I just fell for it. He conned me, he deceived me. I don't buy any of this. These were choices. And the victim is very, very angry at herself for having made these choices, so she denies them, of course.
And the personal responsibility is a bitter
it's
pill to
overwhelming.
swallow.
She denies it.
Yeah.
And the rage is self-directed much more than perpetrator-directed. You could consider the narcissist a force of nature, a natural disaster, a catastrophe, a tsunami, a virus, So it's easy to forgive the narcissist because, listen, what is the narcissist? It's a pathetic wreck of a non-human. It's the outcome of extreme abuse and trauma. He's a victim of abuse and trauma himself, and he's pathetic. It's a clown. The narcissist is a buffoon, but it's very difficult to forgive yourself.
So, Siobhan Diamond asks, is a self-aware narcissist that generally wants to change capable of doing so? And I don't know too many self-aware narcissists, but are they capable of changing?
Actually, most narcissists are self-aware, but they don't regard their narcissism as a problem. They regard it as an advantage. They are proud of their narcissism.
Yeah.
It makes them superhuman and supermen. So while they're fully aware, they don't cast it, they don't regard it, they don't consider it the same way you do. So there's a disagreement, not on the facts, but on the interpretation of the facts. Where
so you just answered my next question by Kara Hemsley Stum. She says, do most narcissists know they're an a-hole and are proud of it?
Yes, but they don't consider themselves a-holes. That's precisely the thing.
Okay.
So where you would say you're obnoxious, I would say I'm truthful. Where you would say you are sadistic, I would say I have a great sense of humor. Where you would say you are abusive, I would say it's for your own good. It's tough love.
Okay.
I would reframe and recast and rewrite, but we would both agree on the behaviors and the facts. There's no dispute on the facts. There's dispute on interpretation, because the narcissist is emotionally invested in his disorder. It was what makes him special and superior.
So Paul Henry, he asks, how many narcissists have been cured insofar as permanently evicted the false self in their NPD? So is that the cold therapy end result, is evicting the false self?
Yeah, cold therapy was administered.
How many people have
only 53.
have benefit?
So I administered cold therapy to 53 individuals. We were in the throes of certifying therapists. We had dozens of therapists ready to be certified. We had seminars in Vienna, in Brazil, in Hungary, and then the pandemic broke out. And so now there's very few cold therapists. and I don't know how many they had treated. I had treated 53. And of these 53, I would say that 47 had lost the false self and grandiosity.
Wow, that is really
It's a
impressive.
high ratio of success, yes.
Huh.
If you define success as losing your false self and grandiosity, many family members are very disappointed. They had expected empathy and love and fireworks, and and suddenly the
Right.
only thing is the narcissist is less compulsive in seeking supply, or not
Yeah.
compulsive, or not
Hmm.
interested in supply. And that's nice. It's great, but that's not the main issue in daily life.
Yeah.
So the nearest and dearest, they're very disappointed. Like, that's all? That's all? I mean, that's it? Yeah,
Oh.
that's it. No false
Hmm.
self. But mind you, if I remove the false self, I give the true self a chance. And if the narcissist then proceeds with regular therapy, CBT, psychodynamic therapies, and so on, he can theoretically evolve into a semi-adult. Never into a
Hmm.
full adult, but a semi-adult.
And
So
make some
he stands a
progress.
chance. He has a chance.
Hmm.
I give him a chance or her.
So Susie Lyon asks, is there info on cold therapy literature video you can recommend for someone who you might suspect to have NPD? Is there specific videos on that on your channel?
I have videos on my YouTube channel.
So they would just look them up on there. Okay, that's good to know. Lily Rodriguez, she asks, if you can, please provide us with a list of movies you've mentioned, some in your videos, for us referencing narcissism. Is
Well,
there any?
the recent one I've watched is The Nest.
The Nest, huh?
The Nest. It's a great depiction of a narcissist. Then there is the Song of Names.
Okay.
Song of Names. These are two recent ones. There's, of course, The Truman Show. There is, so I would recommend that you go to my website, and there is a portion of the website dedicated to film reviews
Okay.
of films.
Well, that's
So if you
good
go
to
to my
know.
website, samvac.tripod.com, and find out scroll up, scroll down, there's a link to film reviews, and there I aggregate everything.
Okay, that's good to know. I did not even know. I did not see that on your website when I was just on it the
It's
other day.
2,000 pages. It's difficult to.
It's really big. Alice Walsh, she asks, what is your #1 survival tip for those who have decided to stay married in a long-term relationship with a covert narcissist?
Become background noise. Do
Okay.
not initiate anything. Do not offer help. Do not give empathy. Only respond. And when you do respond, be minimal in your response. Do not pretend to have a separate existence. Do not pretend to know anything. Do not dispute, disagree, or criticize. Do not be. That's my advice.
Huh. Oh,
And
wow.
that is why, in all honesty, I devised the no contact strategy in 1995, and that's the only advice I ever give to victims. Go away, detach, disconnect, break up, abandon ship, no contact. When people say, you didn't invent no contact. My grandmother went no contact with my grandfather. Yeah, no contact is not just cutting off the cord and walking away. The no contact strategy comprises well over 28 strategies. And if you go to my website again, to the abuse section, you will see a very, very, very long essay on what it means to implement no contact. One of the main problems with people, victims, is that they think no contact is just cutting off. I mean, but that's not true. So they end up making many mistakes within the no contact.
Okay.
And these mistakes cost them and lead to hoovering. So
I have a question from somebody who is in trying to heal. Her name is Valerie Vinger. How do I heal as codependent while also displaying narcissistic behaviors, as I feel invisible when I empathize and narcissistic when I share? So Lydia had suggested a healing type retreat for those type codependents. Is there any information on a retreat like that, or?
Not to the best of my knowledge, but what do I know? She's only my wife.
Yeah.
So,
Samantha Harrington says,
but wait a minute, she deserves a bit of a longer answer. So, codependency shares the shadow part with the narcissist. This is the bridge. This is the connection. So I would advise you to do shadow work. First of all, I would advise you to watch my videos on the shadow part, including the shadow part in codependence and so on, and then seek out other channels, because I don't provide this. Seek out other channels and focus on your shadow part. Codependence, codependency is as a post-traumatic solution, exactly like narcissism. And it is people-pleasing in the sense that it aims to gratify a potential or actual abuser. But at the same time, it involves extortion techniques, because the codependent uses clinging, neediness, learned helplessness to blackmail her intimate partner, because she needs the intimate partner to provide a safe base and a safe environment and to regulate internal psychological needs. So in this sense, she also needs supply.
Yeah.
Both the narcissist and the codependent are dependent on other people for the regulation of their internal world.
And the other person's made that investment, they want to keep investing.
So this is a very sick and largely narcissistic dynamic, because the codependent, for example, wouldn't let go. Even if her intimate partner wants to just break up, or, I mean, she wouldn't let go. That's very selfish. There's a lot of selfishness in codependence. All this comes from the shadow part. So the repressed part, the part that the codependent will not admit to. She has a narrative. She has a narrative that in its extreme, with the empaths and all these people, narrative that says I'm an angel, I'm blameless, I did not contribute anything to my abuse, I'm not responsible, I am perfection, I'm perfect. I'm perfect is a narcissistic statement. Never mind if I'm perfect as a victim. I'm perfect as a victim. Okay, makes you a narcissist.
That's interesting. Samantha Harrington asked, can someone that was raised in a seriously abusive and narcissistic environment have the ability to not become narcissistic their self?
Well, majority of people don't. Only a small minority become narcissists, borderlines, and codependents.
I think it's like 1% is narcissist, 1%.
Well, officially it's 1% of the general population, but we begin to accept that narcissism and borderline and psychopathy combined probably are around 5% of the population, and that generally personality disorders are something like 15% of the population.
Okay, so that is a pretty good chunk of the population.
Yeah. Every seventh person you come across is likely to have a seriously disordered personality. Doesn't have to be cluster B, could be cluster A, cluster C, and so on.
Okay. Kat Roberts, she has a comment. Or a question, do you think narcissists tend to want to upset everyone at Christmas?
Well, narcissists hate holidays and birthdays because it's not about them.
Okay.
They're not the center of attention, and they're not the prime movers and shakers. People are happy, not because the narcissist made them happy. It's a myth that narcissists don't want people to be happy. Narcissists want people to be happy because of them.
Okay.
As long as they are the cause of the happiness, it's okay. But if the happiness emanates from another source, the narcissist will try to spoil it. Will try to destroy the good mood, the cheer, undermine the togetherness and the community and the communal feeling. So narcissists are averse to anything they don't control and anything that cannot be directly and exclusively attributed to them.
I have a compliment here from Skirtu Marianne. I have nothing to ask, only to show my admiration and appreciation for all his work.
Well, wait till we meet next.
Vesena Odak says, what is the best way to deal with teenagers that are showing traits of narcissism?
Teenagers cannot show traits of narcissism. That's another nonsensical online myth. We are forbidden from diagnosing pathological narcissism before the age of 18, and now we are changing this, and probably it will become 25. So, for example, recent studies in narcissism, Keith Campbell, John Twenge, they study populations between the age of 18 and 25, 15 and 25, I'm sorry, and they define this group as adolescents.
Okay.
So we are moving the goalposts of adolescence, and probably shortly we will not diagnose pathological narcissism, let alone narcissistic personality disorder, before the age of 25. Why? Why? Because there are two periods of healthy narcissism. One is in the formative years, between age 6 months and 6 years, and the other period is adolescence. In both periods, narcissism is healthy. Healthy because it helps the individual to explore the world grandiosely, to take on the world. You need to be grandiose to take on the world. And you need to be grandiose to separate yourself and individuate yourself. You need to say, I know better than my mother. I'm more clever than my father. And I'm strong enough to change the world. These are narcissistic, grandiose statements, but they're healthy when you're an adolescent. If you don't have this narcissism, actually, the main form of abuse in early childhood, which produces narcissism later in adulthood, is when the mother or father, usually the mother, does not allow the child to express his healthy narcissism.
Okay.
Does not allow the child to separate, to become an individual, to criticize her, to explore the world grandiosely, either because she's narcissistic and feels challenged, or because she's codependent and depends on the child, parentifies the child, renders the child a parent, or because she competes with the child, or because she is absent, or because she's depressive, whatever it is, it's called dead mother. Andre Green called it dead mother. Whatever it is, it's when the child is not allowed to express healthy narcissism that he becomes a narcissist. Because when you don't have healthy narcissism, you have malignant narcissism. One way or the other, you're going to end up with narcissism. So we don't diagnose narcissism in teenagers.
So I have another question here. Radek Pillage, ask him
Pillage? I love the name. Pillage. Pillage and plunder, yeah.
Ask him what he thinks about the recently published personality construct of the tendency for victimhood. And I'm not familiar with this. I don't think it was yours.
It's a study, it's a series of 3 studies by a group of Israeli psychologists led by a psychologist woman called Gabai. And they suggested, after these 3 studies, they suggested that there is a personality construct of a victim. Now, to explain, personality construct is a set of traits and behaviors that go together all the time, and are manifest, are expressed, are observable, discernible in a variety of settings. So the same traits and behaviors will happen with a family, workplace, church, football match, neighborhood pub. In all these situations, these traits and behaviors will suddenly be visible. So this is a personality construct. And they said there is a personality construct of a victim. This kind of person will interpret everything as being victimized.
And it's got the pervasiveness.
Yeah, his identity would crucially depend on his victimhood. Now, mind you, there's absolutely nothing new about this. There's actually a branch of psychology called victimology. Nothing new about this. I have written an article in 1995 titled When Victims Become Narcissists. Really nothing new about this. But it's nice to have substantiation of this. And I fully concur. I absolutely think that there are people who had transformed their victimhood into the main determinant of their identity. They use victimhood to understand the world, to make sense of the world. They use victimhood to organize their lives and how they behave, what they avoid, what they do. their choices, mate selection, which mates to choose. Their
Right.
comfort zone is victimhood, so they would tend to select abusers to be abused so that they feel comfortable. And their victimhood is coupled with grandiosity, so they would be angelic, blameless, blemishless, etc., abrogating personal responsibility. Actually, the studies conducted by Gabay contributed something. They proved, big studies by the way, they proved conclusively that professional eternal victims lack empathy,
Oh, wow.
are grandiose, and are vengeful and vindictive. And if this sounds like a narcissist, it's because it is.
Wow.
That's why I keep saying empaths are covert narcissists. They just
So
don't
this,
know it.
it's good that they're doing this ongoing research on this then to really flush out some of these nuances, I guess.
I'm not saying that empaths know that they are narcissists and pretend they're acting. No, they really believe it. I mean, they have the victimhood stance. They have this, the victimhood thing, you know.
Mhm.
So the victimhood trait or the victimhood personality construct. And they really believe themselves to be victims. And they really believe that they are impeccable and perfect and had contributed nothing whatsoever, even remotely, to the situations they find themselves in for decades.
Yeah.
And like they don't stop for a minute to say, what the heck? I've been married to 4 abusers. I've dated 26 abusers. My boss had abused me in the last 12 working places. In church, could it be that there's some common denominator to all these situations? And might it be me?
Yeah.
They never asked this.
Well, I have Nadia Komarov. She says, I have no questions, just would like to express my gratitude. Immense, may I say. So you've helped
Are
many,
these
many
comments
people.
planted to provide me with supply to keep me going?
Let's sprinkle them in here and there. Ola Akin says, how do I overcome fear, obligation, and guilt?
How do you
I
overcome
guess
fear,
in the
obligation, and
after,
guilt?
yeah.
Why are these negative things? These are called
Oh,
these are called regulatory affective stimuli. These are the things that keep you, for example, social and not antisocial.
okay.
These are the things that warn you that you're doing some things you shouldn't because of the consequences, fear. Guilt prevents you from hurting other people. These are good things. Why would you want to overcome them? It's a psychopathic question.
Okay.
The
Well,
psychopath
that's
would ask this.
interesting.
The psychopath would come to, doctor, can you I don't want to feel guilty when I screw people. I don't want to be afraid. And by the way, psychopaths lack the fear response. They have no physiological reaction to fear. For
Okay.
example, they don't sweat. Their heart rate remains stable. And the parts of the brain that are activated during fear are not activated in psychopaths. They are fearless in the fullest sense of the word.
I've seen them actually laugh when something dangerous is happening.
Yeah.
I've seen people actually laugh and think it's funny and react.
They also laugh. They also tend to laugh at other people's misfortune and mishaps. So they have they have what we call inappropriate affect. Inappropriate affect is when you laugh in a funeral.
Yeah.
And they have, but they also, their bodies and brains are very, very different to normal people. One of the main things, they don't have a fear reaction. So this guy is asking, or girl, is asking how to become a psychopath, in effect.
Right. So not to worry about that so much.
No.
Simon Shepins has a rather long one here, a rather technical question on the subject of object relation theory, which he seems to mention quite often while discussing the mutual basis of all personality disorders. In a video with Richard Grannon, he mentioned that narcissists possess only internal objects, while psychopaths are exactly the opposite. They have only external objects. But how about psychopathic narcissists? This seems like a paradox and it bothers me. So
I'm
not
sorry
sure.
to have bothered you, and let me try to unbother you. Compounded disorders, such as, for example, psychopathic narcissists, which used to be known as malignant narcissists. Kernberg called them malignant narcissists. Today we call them psychopathic narcissist after Rolling Stone changed the appellation. It goes like this. There is a dominant type, and this dominant type controls the regulation of emotions, moods to prevent lability, self-efficacious agency, in other words, how the person acts in the world in order to obtain favorable outcomes from the environment. So all this is controlled by the dominant type. But in situations of extreme dysregulated anxiety, mood lability, stress, conflict, unresolvable dissonance, in all these situations which are intolerable, another type takes over. It's like the second non-dominant type says, excuse me, dominant type, you failed. I'm feeling bad. I'm taking over. And this type comes forth. So the psychopathic narcissist is most of the time a narcissist.
Okay.
But faced with these extreme situations, he becomes a primary psychopath. And we call this self-states. Borderline has several self-states, one of which is a secondary psychopath. Just to explain the difference between secondary and primary, is that primary psychopath doesn't have empathy, doesn't have emotions. Secondary psychopath has empathy and emotions. So the borderline becomes a secondary psychopath. The self-state comes out. Now, in the past, we had something called
when they're stressed, this
only
happens.
stress, dissonance, fear of abandonment, for example, in the case of the borderline, etc.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, in the past, we used to have something called multiple personality disorder. And today, we have something called dissociative identity disorder. And we are beginning to think that these compounded types, psychopathic narcissism, psychopathic borderline, these compounded types are actually an agglomeration of self-states mediated via dissociation. So the psychopathic narcissist is a narcissist all the time. Then he faces mortification, narcissistic mortification, which is the most stressful situation a narcissist can ever face. At that point, he dissociates. The narcissistic part recedes, and the psychopath takes over to protect the whole structure, because the psychopath is more aggressive, more defiant, is more, more like it. It's a fighter. So the fighter takes over. The psychopath takes over. What the person who asked the question makes the implicit assumption that both types manifest all the time.
Okay.
It's the wrong assumption.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a question that's a little bit related to this idea of what you were saying, that a lot of these social activism and social justice movements are hijacked by narcissists and psychopaths. So my question was on healthy leadership styles. There are groups like Alcoholics Anonymous use 12 steps that promote stewardship of the next sick and suffering. And there's books like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. You might be familiar with that.
Yeah.
It promotes stewardship on an interdynamic model. So would stewardship be more of a guiding framework for leadership on in a healthy style?
There is enormous confusion between stewardship, sponsorship, and delegation. Now, Covey's, not COVID, Covey, C-O-V-E-Y. Covey's stewardship is actually delegation, which he himself admits in the book. It starts with stewardship, and he said actually it's kind of kind of controlled delegation.
Okay.
So it is the transfer of trust and the transfer of responsibilities to another person, so that that other person can fulfill an assignment or a task or a mission and present the outcomes. So stewardship is about a transfer of locus of control via trust. It's not the same in rehab or 12 steps.
Okay.
In 12 steps, you have a sponsor.
Yeah.
And that's a parental role, more like a parent. And there is no full delegation, absolutely. I mean, you seem to have personal experience with this. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
There's not, absolutely, there's not total delegation. It's not like the sponsor tells you in 12 steps, okay, I fully trust you. I mean, go away. Don't call me when it's over. No way. The sponsor is enmeshed in your life and controls, micromanages you, controls. I mean, you call the sponsor when you fell off the wagon. I mean, your sponsor is you. It's your real husband. I mean, it's your real mother and father and sister and brother and husband, and it's your world. And this could last for 10 years or decades even. I've heard of relationships with sponsors that lasted 20, 30 years. So it's very different.
Okay.
Covey's approach is more organization. Trust flows together with responsibilities and outcomes flow up and so on. While the sponsorship thing is more equals. Like, I'm a sponsor, but I've been where you were. I've been there. I mean, I'm you. It's not that I'm above you. I'm not giving you, I don't have what to delegate to you.
Okay.
I just give you my empathy, my compassion, my caring, my presence. Above all, my presence. You need someone to be there for you. So I will be there for you.
Like an advocate or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And in 12 steps is a very interesting thing, not in conjunction with leadership, although we'll talk about leadership in a minute. Because 12 steps is about giving up grandiosity. It's called therapy. It's about giving up grandiosity. Okay, they have this thing with the supreme being and supreme power and all this, but it's actually giving up grandiosity. You lose the locus of control. You don't think that you're the king of the universe. It's one day at a time. So there's no catastrophizing, apropos depression, and so on. A good leader is like a good spouse or intimate partner. It's wrong to merge. It's wrong to become one. It's wrong to fuse. That's not leadership. That's psychosis. That is typical in cults, especially personality cults. A good leader is not about becoming one with you, representing you. He's not your long arm. A good leader is about motivating you to be you. And if this you is different to the leader, is not like the leader, opposes the leader, it's okay. Because that's what a good leader and a good parent does. I keep saying that the main role of a good mother is to push away her children, to push them away, to allow them to separate.
But yeah.
And the same with a good leader. The main role of the good leader is to generate self-autonomy, self-reliance, self-sufficiency, self-efficacy, agency, empowerment. A good leader doesn't want people to be weak and dependent on him. That's not a good leader. A good leader wants people to be so strong that one day they will get rid of him, depose him. That's difficult, it's exceedingly difficult. In the entire history of the human race, I can count on two hands, maybe, leaders who were like that. The great ones.
Wow.
Pericles, maybe, in Athens. It's difficult. You take people like Hitler, they fostered dependence and weakness, and they told you, listen, suspend your judgment, suspend your separate existence, transfer everything to me. Something goes wrong, you're not guilty. It's my fault.
And it's that uniform face that represents it all, just like one face represents the whole thing. That to me is like a real red flag, when it's just that one singular face that it's always being promoted.
No teamwork, no composite figure. Yeah, true, of course, because everything is channeled into the leader. The leader, it's the Führer principle. It's a Führer.
Well, I have an interesting question related to things that kind of are pervasive like that. in macro, I know you're an expert on macroeconomics among your many other things that you're an expert on. China has made huge investments in Africa and South America. And I was going to ask you, should we be more concerned about the CBDC, which is the central bank digital currency, that they have a Chinese version of the digital yuan that's a digital coin, electronic pay. And with their footprint in South America, I mean, all the cars in South America are Chinese. And in Africa, they have these huge solar fields. They're developing these industrial projects. I mean, should we be more concerned that they are pervading, and, you know, what's going to happen with the dollar being, you know, the default currency if this digital yuan takes over the rest of the world? What are your thoughts on that?
Dollar is only one of a few reserve currencies, not default currencies, but reserve currencies. So it's only one of a few, although it's the major one.
Okay.
Reserve currencies reflect the economic might behind the currency and the ability to print the currency, the control over the printing presses. But honestly, all currencies had been digital since the 1960s. All currencies are digital. They are all stored in computers. Your bank in 1980, your balance was a digital thing. I mean, you drew money. So until now, stupidly, we had to convert digital currencies into physical currencies. We wanted to touch the coins and the papers and then we said, wait a minute, why we need this nonsense? All currencies are fiction. All of them are invented in computers, manipulated in computers, moved from one computer to another computer. It's like all digital entries. We can dispense with the coins and the papers. And now we can issue our currency digitally only. The difference between national digital currencies, and China is by no means alone. The difference between Russia is one, and many others. There's about 30 countries in the world today, including in Latin America, including poor countries, which are issuing digital currencies. So the difference between digital currencies and cryptocurrencies is that in the case of digital currency, the central authority of the central bank, the fiat money, the money that is made by decision, this central authority is maintained. And it's illegal to issue the digital currency, although China has had a private company which had issued the digital currency before the Chinese central bank, but now they're getting rid of it. So digital currencies are issued only by central banks. And therefore, there is no difference between now and 1970, because in both cases, digital banks printed money electronically, distributed it to banks electronically, and the money was stored digitally. That we, in a retarded way, insisted on coins, and it means nothing. Cryptocurrencies don't have a central authority, and they have blockchain technology to verify identity. So they are much more difficult to falsify. And the blockchain technology, as some of your viewers may know, simply means that every change in the money supply, every mining of new currency, and every distribution of the mined currency is registered on millions of computers simultaneously via a specialized algorithm. So it's not possible to falsify, because there will always be a few million computers where the truth resides. So it's a great tool to identify for identity. So actually, if you combine the two, digital currency plus blockchain technology, it helps to fight money laundering, because the identity cannot be falsified. Helps to fight crime, cartel, drug cartel money, etc., etc. It's anti-terrorism. So it's a good development. But the transition to digital currency in China doesn't bother me. It only means that the yuan, or renminbi, would become a reserve currency. which is
Okay.
not such a bad thing because it should reflect the global economy.
Right,
But
right.
there's a separate issue not related to this, and that's the rise of China. The
Mhm.
rise of China is very worrying,
Yeah.
because if you look at the history of humanity, let's say in the past at least 800 years, all the empires that had risen were committed to some form of representation, not always liberal democracy, but some
Hmm.
form of representation, opinion, public opinion, some form of equal, equitable distribution of, for example, redistribution to the poor via taxation. So there was commitment to some ideals. And all, since the Magna Carta in Britain in 1215, all empires after that were committed to similar things.
Hmm.
Even colonialism. The colonialists, the people who colonized Africa and Asia, they came with good intentions. It later became malignant. It's like communism. Communism was a good in principle, but horrible in execution. But even communism was built on respect for the individual, respect for work, some form of representation. I mean, China is the
Then it got
first.
hijacked.
China is the first major power uh, which is not committed to any of this.
Hmm.
It's collectivist. The individual has no place. It's a totally collectivized society. There's no concept of representation of any kind.
Hmm.
There is absolute sanction of aggression and violence to resolve, as a way to resolve and arbitrate disputes. So you don't agree with me, I kill you. You know, it's very psychopathic. And I am extremely worried by the rise of China. It's a very old civilization, and it has very laudable philosophies like Confucianism, but it's not practiced.
Jack Ma once said the religion of China is Confucianism.
Confucianism, but it's
Yeah,
not. It's not.
yeah.
It's not
That
by
was his
far.
opinion of that. Would you like to field a few questions on physics, astrophysics?
I'm at your disposal. I'm hostage. You know.
Just I have some from the members, but also I was just wondering if you had a brief comment on dark matter. Is it a particle? What is that stuff? I mean, will they ever figure it out?
Let me answer by referring a bit to history. Whenever we discover a phenomenon or a set of phenomena that we cannot explain, we invent something that we cannot measure. Simple. There was a period in chemistry in the 18th century. When you burn something, it loses weight. The ashes, the weight of the ashes is not like the weight of the original object that you had burned. So they were stumped. They couldn't come with an explanation. What the heck is happening? Where the weight has gone? So they came up with something called phlogiston. Phlogiston was this missing thing. And for well over 70, almost 100 years, they were teaching this in chemistry. And they were convinced that it exists. There were huge names, prominent chemists like Lavoisier, who insisted that phlogiston exists. So, and then much later, there was a problem with some experiments in physics, Michelson-Morley and so on. So before that, they said, well, the whole universe is permeated by something called ether. There's ether in the universe. And you had books about ether, analyzing its properties and how light moves through ether. But of course, there's no ether. Dark matter and dark energy belong in this group. We have come across certain phenomena that at this stage, we are at a loss how to account for within our established models. Instead of saying, okay, so the models suck, we say, no, the models are okay. For example, we say general relativity must be true. We don't say reality challenges general relativity, the hell with general relativity. We don't say this. We say reality challenges general relativity, the hell with reality. It reminds me that once Einstein was asked, what happens if light passes next to the sun and doesn't obey general relativity? just doesn't obey your predictions. He said, well, the sun has a problem then.
Uh-oh.
Dark matter and dark energy are this kind of things. Now, dark matter and dark energy, these inventions, there is a real problem. But this problem can be solved in other ways which do not require dark matter and dark energy. There is a principle in science. It's called the principle of parsimony, Occam's razor. Do not multiply entities. Do not multiply forces. If you have two theories, one with two entities and one with one entity, choose the one with one entity. The fewer entities, the closer you are to the truth. That's Occam's razor. Now, in current day modern physics, we are multiplying entities. We have almost 300 elementary particles. We have 7 components of the universe. We started off with 1, matter. Then we added energy. Then we added dark energy. Then we added dark matter. I mean, first dark matter, then dark energy. And now we have the lambda model, which is a concordance model, which essentially has 7 components. We're multiplying all the time. It's a bad sign. We can explain it differently, and I'll give you very briefly 2 possible explanations. Explanation number 1, the universe is not homogeneous. Because there is the assumption the universe is the same whichever way you look.
It's a base assumption.
The same density of matter, the same. So if you look this direction or that direction or behind you, you will see, you will not be able to tell the differences. They will all look identical. This is called the homogeneity. But we could have a non-homogeneous universe. Like if you stir milk, there's sometimes you have lumps of sour milk, you know. So you could have this. It's called an inhomogeneous universe. And if you have an inhomogeneous universe, you don't need dark matter and dark energy.
Right.
That's one possible explanation. Second possible explanation is actually my work. So I came up with a new theory in physics, a theory that is like next stage.
The time asymmetry, is it related to the
It's about time. And so this new theory assumes that there is a field of time, only time, not motion, not mass, not anything, not energy, just time. And the time is homogeneous. Time is what we call scalar. So if you just use this assumption, problem vanishes. You don't need dark matter, dark energy. So scalar fields, not only time. I propose time, others propose. But I'm not going now into the quintessence and moduli and all these solutions, but I want to say that dark matter and dark energy reflect our ignorance combined with our grandiosity.
Yeah.
I think the recent discoveries are sufficient to challenge substantially, to undermine substantially, even general relativity.
Would that be related to like the gravitational wave measurements? I know that the 2015 Nobel Prize winners, they used gravitational wave measurements as compared to like visible light wave measurements to decide that there are no outside dimensions because there's no leakage. The numbers came through perfectly what they expected, so nothing leaked into other dimensions, and therefore they say there are no more dimensions, we've discovered them all. I mean, is that a beneficial way of looking at it?
These experiments, first of all, tended to support actually the existence of dark energy in a way which I will not go into right now. They discovered some patterns that are known as gravitational wells. But more importantly, they present a refutation to some extent, if we trust these measurements, which I have difficulty doing, but even so, if they are trustworthy, then they would challenge multi-dimensional theories, extra-dimensional theories, like string theories. When we confront ignorance, we react with grandiosity. And so these extra dimensions are like the phlogiston, like the ether, like the dark energy. I mean, when we confront situations, experiments in nature that we cannot explain, we need to go back to the drawing board and start from zero. Not say what we have until now must be true, so let's add to it. No, we must throw everything off the table and start from zero. That's what Einstein did, ironically. When Einstein was confronted with the Michelson-Morley experiment with light, Einstein didn't say, oh, well, the ether must be true. Now I will add to the ether something and I will solve the problem. No, he said this single experiment, it was one experiment, one. He said this single experiment means we have to throw the entire physics to the garbage and start from zero, which is what he did with trains and elevators and I don't know what. He started from zero. That's why he's a genius. Newton did the same. Newton started from zero. We have a critical mass of experiments which legitimize starting from zero, saying we just discovered that everything we thought was wrong. We need to start from zero. And that's what I did with all humility. I don't know if my solution is remotely the correct one, but that's what I tried to do at least.
So as far as our observations of observing this universe, one of our group members, Johnny Taz, asks about that, Professor Vaknin, why is it commonly portrayed in quantum physics that an observing consciousness creates reality rather than simply observes reality? Can the intention of the conscious observer be scientifically measured in the results of those quantum experiments? Isn't it reasonable to say the study of quantum physics is a study of the edge of the present and the future? And does time that you're talking about interact with quantum and classical physics? Does time operate only within the realms of these quantum and classic physics? And, you know, are these laws considered connecting, you know, is time a connection between them? And thank you for your thought-provoking lectures. So how would you...
Time essentially does not exist in quantum mechanics and quantum physics. Or all the equations are time reversible. So if we put time flowing forward and time flowing backward, we get the same result.
Okay.
So time doesn't matter. And which is one of the reasons which led me to believe that time could be a fundamental building block of a new theory. In my new theory, time is a field. And everything that happens, all the events that happen, we give them names. So when a certain type of event happens in the time field, let's call it a wave, small wave or fluctuation. In the time field, we call it particle. When another type of event happens, we call it motion. So everything in physics that we have until now, if you agree to have a time field, then you can derive all the equations of physics from this single assumption, that there is a field.
So that would be the starting back at zero, start with time.
That's starting with zero. Yes, what I did, I said, I want to start from zero and I want to use minimal number of entities. So I don't want to use mass, I don't want to use motion, I don't want to use energy, I refuse to use all these. I'm going to use a single word. And with this single word, I will try to write Shakespeare. And so I took time. I said, okay, of course, time as it is now, going forward, I mean, it's useless. Also, it's wrong, because most of our equations don't show any flow of time. Something must be wrong.
Yeah.
So forget that. So I said, okay, let's think of time as a field. It's a field of potentialities, a field of what could happen. So now it's a field of what could happen. Now let's see if this happens, how does it look? If this wave happens, how does it look? I said, wait a minute. If this wave happens in the field, it looks very much like a particle. And now then, one of the things which would please religious people very much is that in my theory, what we call the universe is a time field. And in order for it to become, in order, for example, to produce matter, or to produce a particle, to produce motion, to produce energy, it must observe itself. So the entire field must observe itself.
Okay.
It's not enough for a single individual to observe the field. There will be zero result. The whole field must observe the field for any result to happen. And many people say that's very close to God. It's like if because the condition in my theory is that the whole field observes itself all the time. Otherwise, there's no creation. Okay, that's besides the point. Now, to the question about the observer. It is not true that in quantum physics, an observer creates anything. First of all, it is only one of many interpretations of quantum mechanics. It's known as the Copenhagen interpretation. There are many others, equally plausible, like many worlds interpretation, which is now the dominant one, actually. And in the many worlds interpretation, the multiverse, that's the dominant interpretation of quantum mechanics today, and there's no observer there. There's no need for an observer. That was a very old interpretation from 1920, from the Solvay conferences. It's a series of conferences that were held in Denmark. And that interpretation said, well, when a particle evolves, moves forward in time, the particle can end up here, or here, or here, or here, or here, can end up anywhere. And they call it the wave function.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like this was the set of all probabilities where the particle may end. It is the choice of the experimenter that decides where the particle is going to be. Mind you, the experimenter doesn't create the particle. The experimenter just chooses one of the possibilities, one of the potentials of the wave function. We call it collapse. The observer collapses the wave function into a particle. But even this, the observer, has largely disappeared from quantum mechanics and quantum physics. And today we rarely use it as a... Definitely, even at that time, there were huge debates. What does it mean? For example, Schrödinger came up with a cat experiment. What if there's a cat in a box? Is it alive or is it dead? And when the experimenter opens the box, does the experimenter decide if the cat is alive or dead? And Einstein and others, Podolsky, Rosen, they also, I mean, there were many challenges to this. So that's by no means the orthodoxy of quantum mechanics.
Constantly new discoveries. There was a recent Nobel Prize winner, I cannot think of his name, who he believes there was a universe before this universe based on the cosmic microwave background and signs that we see in it now. So we could be discovering more and more things.
One of the main problems of physicists is that they have no training in philosophy. We should not discuss anything that is not decidable. Anything that cannot be subjected to experiments, falsifiability. So to say there was a universe before this universe, nice, meaningless.
Yeah.
To say there is God, nice, meaningless. To say the world is a simulation, nice, meaningless. I don't deal with meaningless things.
Yeah.
I'm a scientist by training. My original training was a physicist. I'm a scientist. Can I design can the theory produce predictions, which I can design experiments to falsify, to prove that the predictions were wrong? This is science. The rest is metaphysics, bullshit, nonsense. HBO proposed TV scripts. Very nice. There's a place for everything. Science, it's not. It's pseudoscience in the worst sense of the word. Now, of course, these people who tell you there was a previous universe, they tell you in the seam between the previous universe and the current universe, we can measure this, we can measure that. You cannot measure anything. We don't know where the seam is. One of the reasons I've left physics, is that physics went the opposite way of chemistry. Chemistry started with alchemy and became a science. Physics started as a science and became superstition, became fantasy, became alchemy, became an esoteric
Speculation. Yeah.
thing. Physics now is esoteric, it's occult, it's magic. It's not serious. I'm sorry, but 90% of the work produced nowadays in physics is not serious work. Cannot be tested, cannot be falsified, cannot be experimented, speculative, nonsensical, grandiose, counterfactual. It's a very disappointing field in which there had been no real progress since the 1980s with the inflationary model. Since then, it's utter, sheer, unmitigated alchemy, metaphysics.
Kind of like conspiracy theories in a way.
It's nonsense. It's simply nonsense.
Yeah.
Simply nonsense. You mentioned astrology, and I asked you to not ask me about this because I don't want to insult you or others. But honestly, together with astrology, I would consider string theories in the same class.
Right.
Many physical theories in physics do not have an ontological or epistemological advantage over astrology nowadays. And that's a sad testimony.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to some of these questions from the people. Lady A had another one. This is relating to the merging and the fusing. Is inclination of codependent to merge and fuse always dysfunctional? It welcomes abuse and shared fantasy, or can fusing happen within personal boundaries and be healthy? So that's like, I guess, is there a healthy type of codependency? If
How can you fuse within boundaries? Fusion, by definition, is the elimination of boundaries.
Okay.
And
So that's
your answer. Your answer is it can never be healthy because you cannot be healthy without boundaries.
Right.
Boundaries are the guardians and the firewalls of health, of your mental health. If you allow people to invade your space and to do with your furniture as they please, then you are subject to home invasion. It's not a life, it's home invasion. And the same with walking on eggshells. If you walk on eggshells, it's a circus act, not a life, you know?
Yeah.
So merging with someone, fusing with someone, becoming one organism with two heads is a freak show, not a life.
Okay. Jean Marie and Cruel Ender, they say Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah, Sam.
Cruel says Merry Christmas? How cruel of her.
Cruel. Simona Freya, her and I have had quite some interesting conversations on these topics. She says, Dear Professor Vaknin, please, what is the difference between emotional intelligence, IQ, and empathy? Is there a good, reliable test for EQ? Maybe online? Thank you.
Well, first of all, there are numerous tests, good, reliable, valid tests for emotional intelligence. First popularized by Goldman and others, but so if you go to Wikipedia, simply type emotional intelligence, they have a section on the test, summarizing the tests.
Okay.
And it's a great section. To the best of my knowledge, includes all the tests known with links to the original tests and so on. So this is about the tests. Okay. Emotional intelligence and empathy are not the same. I would put it this way: emotional intelligence is the cake, the chocolate cake, and empathy is the chocolate. Empathy is an ingredient without which you cannot have emotional intelligence, but emotional intelligence is way more than empathy. Empathy is your instrument, the base ingredient, but emotional intelligence includes ability to interact, ability to respect other people's boundaries, ability to collaborate, lack of grandiosity, etc., etc., etc. I mean, it has dozens of parameters. And of course, Daniel Goleman and others, they've written extensively about emotional intelligence, and I recommend to read the books. There are each of these books is well over 400 pages, so you can imagine it's not only empathy.
Wow, yeah. So Olesa Saniasin, how much is narcissism a personal choice as the consequences of traumatic life? Do human beings have any control over it?
Yes.
So
Yeah. Sorry. Continues.
I was just wondering, does it happen when you're too young to have control over it? Or you mentioned
As
several
I said,
states.
when you're too young, you cannot be a narcissist. There's healthy narcissism. Um, Narcissism is a choice, and I can prove it very easily. When narcissists, the most malignant, vicious, grandiose, hypervigilant, insane, obnoxious narcissists, when they are put in the army, when they join the army, when they are placed in prison, when they're hospitalized, suddenly they're pussycats. They're
Right.
nice, they're supportive, they're attentive, they are empathic, they never ever offend anyone, because if you do this in jail, you have very short life expectancy, etc. Given what we call total institutions, these are called total institutions. The fact that the narcissist is able to modulate and regulate and eliminate most of his behaviors, if not all of them, and display suddenly traits that no one had ever suspected that he possesses, proves conclusively that narcissism is a choice.
It's a
The
choice.
narcissist can empathize with you because he has cold empathy at least. The narcissist can take your wishes and needs and priorities into account. He just doesn't care about you.
Doesn't care. Oh. So Charmaine Williams asks, do narcissists ever confront their mothers for abusing them?
I'm sure they do.
I mean,
I don't know. I'm sure they do. I know a
yeah,
few who did, and many who didn't. I mean,
they
there's
might
no rule here.
be aware that the abuse came from the mother.
No,
Okay.
that many of them do. Many of them do. Although depends on the type of abuse. If the narcissist as a child had been idolized, placed on a pedestal, he would tend to idealize his mother. That's the famous Madonna whore complex.
Okay.
He would tend to render her a saint. And if his spouse dares to confront his mother, he would rather divorce than, so
Yeah.
that's only in case he had been idolized. And, in case he had been classically abused, verbally, psychologically, let alone sexually and so on, most narcissists have clear recollection of such things and are angry at their mothers and parents and so on. But their solution is to outdo the abuser. Like next time it's not going to happen to me. Next time I'm going to be the one who does this to people.
Right. So another one is who is worse? Is Angelique Tenuri. Hi, I would like to know if BPD is worse than NPD. To me, they're quite similar. I tend to believe borderlines are more dangerous and impulsive. So
borderlines are more labile, they are more dysregulated, and consequently they are less predictable. And when they're confronted with stress and anxiety, especially abandonment anxiety, they become secondary psychopaths, which is seriously bad and dangerous and reckless. And because they are unpredictable, you can't defend yourself. There are no warning. I mean, it's out of the blue, literally, because it's an internal dynamic.
Unknown, yeah.
It's an internal dynamic. This is what we call lability, because so the dynamic is internal, the threat is real, and it's like serious mess. At least with the narcissist, if you know the narcissist, you can pretty much predict him. I mean, he likes narcissistic supply. Give him some supply, he calms down. It's very manageable. He's also
and the
very
trajectory is pretty pronounced of the eventual devaluation. It's just a trajectory.
You also can predict this. It's predictable.
Yeah.
He's going to dump you. I mean, he's going to discard you. Prepare yourself. I mean, it's all in the cards. Borderline is totally chaotic. It's totally chaotic in this sense. But psychologically, borderline is, well, there's a debate here. Emotionally, borderline is in a far better place than a narcissist. There was a scholar by the name of Rothstein. Rothstein said that children, when they're confronted with abuse, first they try to become narcissists. Some of them succeed to become narcissists. They develop a false self, and the false self protects them, isolates them from the abuse. So some of them become narcissists. But many of them fail to become narcissists. These are the
Okay.
failed narcissists, and the failed narcissist is what we call borderlines.
Oh,
That's
okay.
Grotstein, not Vaknin.
Mhm.
So borderlines are in much better place than narcissists because they have empathy and they have access to emotions. They feel love. Narcissists, can you imagine what a punishment it is? Never to feel love. Never, ever. So, for example, not only
It's a
love,
very hollow
it's
existence.
non-existence, it's absence,
Yeah.
it's death, it's death. Narcissists are dead inside. They are the walking dead. They're zombies. Borderlines are not like that. They're hyper emotional. But on the other hand, because borderlines don't have the narcissistic defenses, it's much easier for them to become psychopaths and psychotic, to lose it, to go insane, and therefore to commit suicide.
Oh boy.
So there's a plus side and a minus side to this coin.
Right.
Borderlines are given the gift of emotions and empathy, but it is this gift, this vulnerability, this exposure, they don't have a skin. They don't have a skin to protect them. The narcissistic skin, they're skinless. It is this
Yeah.
that pushes them to suicide
Right.
and to psychosis, which was the observation first made by Otto Kellner. I'm trying to use others, mention other scholars, so that people don't accuse me that I'm promoting only myself.
Right. So, Renat Bachter, he's asking, is having no or only cold empathy and all its following consequences the main sign of being a narcissist?
No. Cold empathy is common to narcissists, common to psychopaths, and
Yeah.
common to victims of complex trauma, actually.
Okay.
So cold empathy is simply a device that is intended to avoid the emotional consequences of empathizing with other people.
Okay.
If you are if you're in a post-traumatic state, let's say a horrible divorce, you've been abused by a narcissist for 20 years, when you exit, you need all the energy and all the resources to yourself. You can't afford the luxury of empathizing. You can't afford to absorb the pain and the hurt of other people. So you become much less empathic. You actually develop cold empathy. Now, cold empathy simply means that you're able to read other people properly, but you don't react emotionally to the information that you glean. So I can look at you. If I have cold empathy, I look at you, I say she's sad, but it does nothing to me. I'm not reacting emotionally to your sadness. I'm just noting the fact that you're sad.
Yeah. So, John Knowles asked, does parental alienation syndrome result in narcissism in a male child?
Parental alienation syndrome is a hotly contested construct. Generally, before we proceed, in psychology, we have nonsense. Nonsense are constructs that rely on nothing. They don't rely on studies. They're not substantiated. There's no proof. And many of them are internally contradictory and contradict a lot of well-established information. So example of nonsense, empath. Example of nonsense, emotional flashback. These are nonsense. Then we have middle of the way. These are constructs where the scholarly experimental substantiation is lacking to some extent, but the constructs are compelling. So among other nonsense, by the way, is shy borderline and recovered narcissist. These are also bits of nonsense, if we're making an inventory list. Parental alienation syndrome belongs to this group of middle of the way because it makes a compelling case. A compelling case, but lacks the substantiation.
So maybe it needs more research?
Yeah, a lot more research and a much better definition of what it is. Because right now, PAS is whenever your husband turns the kids against you. Then that's PAS. That's not PAS. That's a jerk. That's an asshole. That's not PS. We need a much better definition, which will allow us to design experiments, which will allow us to conduct studies, which will allow us to finally declare a verdict of yes or no. Other things that I mentioned in the nonsense class, there's no way even to design an experiment, even if you wanted to, because they are so utterly nonsensical that they're,
Well, I personally experienced the situation with the flashback being distorted. I had reoccurring flashbacks of my a family member that would shoot a BB gun at my feet when I was a very small child. It did torment me. And we had so many weapons around and everything that I had remembered it as like a 22 gun being shot at me. But in therapy, discussing it over and over, I realized it was a BB gun, not a real gun being shot at me. So for years, I had distorted that in my mind. And then I kind of came back down to realize the reality of what had really happened. So I myself have experienced that distortion of the flashback.
no, it's not
You get
flashback.
so
It's false
emotional
memory.
over it.
It's
Things
not
get all
flashback.
mixed up.
It's not flashback. It's false memory.
Yeah. So, I
Flashback,
mean, it can happen. I mean,
flashback. It's not flashback. What you described has nothing to do with flashback.
yeah.
It's false memory.
Mm-hmm.
But flashback is when reality vanishes and you think you're in another place in another time with other people. That's a
Right. It
flashback.
seems real right at that
You
time.
could have very powerful, overwhelming emotions connected to specific memories.
Mm-hmm.
It happens, of course. That's
Yeah.
emotional dysregulation.
Somatic feelings.
You can't have emotional flashbacks because flashbacks include taste, smell, sight, and the total loss of reality test. You are no longer next to the library. You are back there and he's pointing a gun at you.
Right.
And you really believe it. And
Mhm.
you may even shoot him back and discover later that you had shot the librarian because you didn't see the librarian. You saw him. That's a flashback.
And it's distorted.
But if suddenly you have an influx of emotions connected to that incident and you are totally destroyed, and that's not a flashback. That's simply emotional dysregulation. So emotional flashback is such a nonsensical construct. We can't even design experiments. It's meaningless. And we have many nonsense like this, like recovered what? He recovers what exactly? What is a recovered narcissist? He recovers from what? It's his personality. It's when you recover something, you go back to a previous state.
Right.
Like recovered from cancer. You used to be cancer free. Now you recovered. You went back to being cancer free. Narcissist has no previous state. He's always been a narcissist. He recovers to what? He goes back to what? So we can't even make sense of this nonsense, So we don't bother. In proper academia, not the YouTube so-called doctors, half of which are not real doctors but liars. Forget all this. I'm talking in real academia, university. We don't even bother to. I mean, we just mock these people. We just say they're con artists. They're simply con artists.
Well, I have a question relating to how that works with the narcissists remembering things. Donna Massley says, I would like to ask the professor if the history or fantasy thinking changes with the narc. She relates an example where someone told him that the third woman would be the one for him, and he was convinced that I was the third. But now that I have been discarded, will the next one be the magical third? Can he reject that vision because it didn't work out or it was wrong, or adjust it? Or are these lies he tells himself, or does he believe them so strongly he has to devise a way to make them fit the circumstances? Like,
if he believes them, it has nothing to do with narcissism. It's schizotypal. This type of belief is called schizotypal. It's a form of very extreme and malignant magical thinking.
Okay.
And if he doesn't believe them, which is far more likely, he simply told her what she wanted to hear, and was his way of hoovering her or making sure she remains in his life. It's like,
Right.
if I want a woman, I would tell her when I was a kid, someone told me that I will meet a woman with red hair and these circumstances. And you see, it happens, and it's you.
Yeah.
You're the one. You're the chosen. This is catering to her grandiosity. She's
Hmm.
the chosen one. She's the one who is on earth to fulfill this vision.
Hmm.
He's catering to her grandiosity. Narcissists manipulate other people's grandiosity or need for grandiosity or need to be special. But if
Right.
he does
Hmm.
believe it really, it's a serious problem because it's very sick. And
Mhm.
when the vision conflicts with reality, he has to withdraw from reality even further.
Hmm.
And then it could lead to psychosis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Marisano Zunjunski asks,
happens. Yeah.
um, any comment or clue regarding Myers-Briggs? Is it complete trash? Or is there some value, at least in the Jungian original part?
The
I'm not
great
sure.
mistake of all previous versions of the diagnostic and statistical manual is that they compiled lists of symptoms. They were what we call categorical.
Okay.
They were not dimensional. And human beings cannot be reduced to lists or to
Hmm.
categories. Human beings are dimensional. They're on a spectrum.
Hmm.
And in this sense, Myers-Briggs and others, by the way, not only Myers-Briggs, I mean, there's quite a few, they were a very welcome contribution, not in the sense that they are valid or have been tested extensively or they have predictive power, which they don't, but in the sense that they let go of this inventory list thing. Like, what is a narcissist? He has 9 points. Are you kidding me? This is a
Yeah.
narcissist? 9 points? Are you serious? In the latest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, edition 5 from 2013, there is an alternate model of narcissism, which reads like a short story. It has no lists, no bullet points, no nothing. It describes the narcissist. And so you finally say, wow, now I understand what is a narcissist, you know? Myers-Briggs and others, they did this. They were engines, literary engines. They produced stories. They produced narratives. They produced pieces of fiction, which corresponded much more closely to humans, actual humans, how
Hmm.
people think, how people talk, how they behave, how they interact. So they were a kind of mental, intellectual bridge.
Hmm.
And there are no studies that validate these dimensional descriptions.
Hmm.
And they have been largely rejected by the academic community, which I'm against. I think they should be studied more closely. But there were very, very benign and welcome developments at the time. And to this
Hmm.
very day, they resonate with many people. The problem with this, the reason why academia is rejecting them is because the definitions are too broad,
Okay. Hmm.
can fit anyone. You know, when you go to a fortune teller,
Yeah.
she tells you the kind of sentences that can fit 9 out of 10 people. And of course, they fit you. You say, wow, she's amazing. She has access to the spiritual realm. And it's nonsense.
You're in a transition. Yeah.
Yeah, you're in transition. You have had difficult relationships. Are you bloody? I mean, who had? I mean, it's so the Myers-Briggs and all these, they have this like too
Hmm.
generalized. And there's a lot of overlap. If you bother to
Yeah.
read everything, there's a lot of overlap. So they can't miss. Now, we
Hmm.
don't like in psychology, the so-called scientific psychology, we don't like when something can't miss. We actually look for things that will miss, because when they miss, they eliminate.
Okay.
They eliminate, and we are left with the core. But
Hmm.
if there's something that applies to everything, what does it say? It says nothing.
Yeah. Okay. I have another one. It's a little bit long. It's about her personal experience. Agnes Baragesky.
We will not hold it against them. No,
Yeah.
these names. Yeah.
Does the still-faced experiment give us any insight as to how a child grows up not having empathy? happened to me is I should feel something as a person relates a painful event, but I just feel frantic, looking upon for empathic ways I should react. It's like being blindfolded in a world of people who all have the map. I was put in childcare at 3 months, and I do not think I got enough mirroring there. So does that still-faced experiment give us any insight? Is that a childhood, related to childhood psychology?
The still face experiment, which was first conducted in 1978 and then repeated many, many times, I think conclusively proved that reflexive empathy is heavily influenced by the mother's reactions. Now, we must make a distinction between reflexive, cognitive, and emotional empathy. The narcissist, for example, has reflexive and cognitive, but not emotional. That's why I call it cold empathy. There's no warmth. It's totally automated, robotic. So children are born with reflexive empathy. When a baby follows you with his eyes and smiles at you, that he usually smiles at you when you smile. I mean, mothers think it's reverse. Mothers think that the baby smiles at them and then they smile. But we documented it on camera. The mother smiles first. The baby reacts.
Okay.
And so if the mother keeps a still face, which was the experiment, the very cruel experiment, by the way, I'm not sure how ethical it is. If the mother keeps a still face, the baby goes frantic because the baby absolutely goes hysterical. He develops an baby equivalent of a panic attack. The lack of feedback from the mother frustrates his reflexive empathy, and the babies depend on mothers. If mother doesn't smile at me, the baby sort of catastrophizes. Mother doesn't smile at me means she doesn't notice me. She doesn't notice me, she will not feed me. I will die. The need to be seen. I have a lecture online. The need to be seen. The need to be seen is crucial survival skill. And because a narcissist never evolves beyond the age of 4, probably, he still has this, the baby need to be seen. Narcissist is a big baby who keeps seeking, who keeps looking, wants to be seen. Because in his primitive mind, if he is not seen, he will die. Simply. And this is the inner experience. It's the first time I'm mentioning my personal experience. When I'm not seen, I die. The narcissists maybe are the only humans who had experienced death and came to tell about it.
Wow.
Their existence is vitiated when they're not seen. So children whose reflexive empathy is frustrated are terrified. It's a state of existential profound dread. And you see that in their behavior, in videos. Go online, type still face experiment video. Watch the videos. Child is in panic. Child, I mean, few days old. Panic.
Wow.
But the mother's facial expressions, body language, movements in the room, which the child follows, are critical only when it comes to the reflexive empathy. They have no effect on cognitive or emotional empathy.
Okay.
They are critical in developing object constancy, realizing, internalizing the certitude that mother will always be there, will not abandon me. And so this is crucial. The still face experiments creates object inconstancy, or as Piaget called it, object impermanence, but has no effect on the cognitive and emotional aspects of empathy. So the answer to this lady, I assume, question is no. This experiment is not relevant. However, because she had been raised in an environment where cognitive and emotional empathy had been affected, foster homes, orphanages, we have a series of very famous experiments where Romanian orphans were taken from Romania, brought to the United States and adopted. And they all of them, when they grew up, lacked empathy. They had no empathy because they grew up in orphanages. Cognitive and emotional empathy is the outcome of an interaction with an object, with a good enough mother, usually. Object means a person. Okay, with an object that is accepting, warm, caring, and compassionate, loving, but also reflecting, mirroring, boundary setting, a bit disciplinarian, like you shouldn't take this girl's toy. It makes her cry. Doesn't feel. That's the way you create empathy. You know.
Yeah.
If all this is missing, if you grow up as part of a homogenized, commodified mass of faceless children, where no one pays you specific attention, I mean, you end up without empathy, and then you have to fake empathy, imitate empathy. You have to think about empathy. That's what she's doing. When she's confronted with a person, she says, how should I react? That is thinking. That is cognitive empathy. And that is cold empathy. She has cold empathy. She just described the experience of cold empathy.
Well, that's fascinating. I have another question relating to children. Donna Massley, she was wondering if there's a connection between the somatic narcissists and pedophilia. Are they capable of understanding it's wrong, or due to the abuse they suffered? Do they spend energy fighting this internally, or find ways just to satisfy it? Or
no, there's no connection between somatic narcissism and pedophilia. These are two totally distinct mental health issues that have totally different etiology, causation, and they are not even remotely related. They really belong to two families. But somatic narcissists are much more likely to commit incest. But incest and pedophilia, even if incest is committed with a child, it's not pedophilia. People confuse the two. They confuse incest and pedophilia. Pedophilia is a totally different issue. Incest is also a totally different issue. Incest, the somatic narcissist is likely to commit incest because he is autoerotic, and when he sleeps with his child or has sexual interaction with his child, he's having sexual interaction with 50% of himself. So it's autoerotic. Second thing, he objectifies everyone. Everyone becomes his property. So it's the child is his property, he can do whatever he wants. Thirdly, the somatic narcissist derives narcissistic supply from his body, irresistibility, sexual prowess, muscles, etc. And so the child, he will relate to the child via this dimension, not cerebrally, not intellectually. So there's a whole different dynamic. But the answer to the question, they are more prone to incest, but not to pedophilia.
Okay, all right. You've hung in there. I've only got a couple more. Elizabeth Thompson, she has a question. How do humans know that humans aren't sapient and aware of their own mortality? And it seems, isn't this related to the Cartesian split, where we thought we were so divorced from nature? I've heard of many experiments where monkeys do like tend to their dying with food and comfort and grooming. So I think we've kind of come out of that thinking that animals aren't sapient.
So I'm not sure I understood the question. She's asking, how do we know that animals are not sapient?
How do humans know that animals aren't sapient?
Oh, I see. Well, here's the thing. How do humans know that other humans are sapient?
Okay.
We don't. The answer is we don't.
Okay.
I don't have access to your mind. You might as well be a very, very sophisticated android robot sent back from the future. I have no access to your mind. I have to rely 100% on your self-reporting. You are telling me, I'm human, I have a mind, it's very much like yours. Well, maybe not. It's, you're not a narcissist, I hope. I feel sad, I feel happy, I'm tired, you're tired. I mean, we build this verbal bridge, which is known as the intersubjectivity agreement, but it's total fantasy. It's total confabulation. It
Okay.
can never, ever be substantiated. You see the color red, I see the color red. Forget love. Red. How on earth do I know what is your inner experience of the color red? It's the same wavelength, we both agree. We can measure the wavelength. But how do I know that your experience of red is the same as mine? Maybe I'm a Daltonist, colorblind. Maybe the color red in my mind is associated with a major catastrophe. I saw my mother bleeding to death when I was 4. In your mind, red is associated with beautiful balloons on your first birthday. How do we experience red? Now this is red, which is an objective quantity, a wavelength. How do I know that when you say love, you mean the same thing as when I say love? I have no access to your mind. I have access to one mind only, mine. And even that, you know what, is debatable. So how on earth would I access the mind of animals? We cannot say anything about other minds, animal or not. And this is known as the other minds problem. You can read about it online.
Okay, I gotcha. Last question. We're here. We've made it through. Lady 8 had a question. Is there anything behaviorally speaking that the codependent can learn or should adopt from the narcissist that would protect them or her from future abuse and the desire to attach to those NPD partners?
You said we both made it, we survived and so on.
Yes.
But I'm 60 years old. I have my years are dog years. Every minute of yours is like, you know, I'm like dog years. I have like what, 7 years to live. So I think that codependent, there's something to learn from everyone. I mean, had narcissism been a total loss, total waste, you know, evolution would not have allowed it to form. Narcissists are, for example, motivated to create because creativity attracts attention. So many creative people are narcissists. Narcissists are motivated to dominate, to secure attention. They have insecure attachment style. They need to control and so on. So they gravitate to the top. Psychopaths.
The lobster, yeah.
Yeah, psychopaths are goal-oriented. So psychopaths are very good in obtaining goals, which is very helpful if you're a surgeon or a military leader or in charge of the moon shot, you know. So there's nothing which is, and also in psychology, people make this mistake. They say, depression is bad. Really? If you are in Auschwitz, in a concentration camp, and all your family has just been converted into smoke, and you do not react with depression, that you are sick. Depression is healthy, depending on the context, and sick depending on the context. Everything in psychology crucially depends on context. There's nothing that is by itself sick, by itself healthy, by itself good, by itself bad. This is splitting. This is
or possibly like a stagnating depression instead of a progressing depression.
No,
I don't know.
depression could last. For example, if you, in the previous example, if you left Auschwitz and you've been depressed for the rest of your life, I'm not sure it's an unhealthy reaction.
Okay, all right.
It depends on context. So the codependent can learn a few things from the narcissist. First of all, boundaries. Narcissists have extremely rigid boundaries. Second thing, assertiveness. Yeah, be assertive. Third thing, put yourself first. Your welfare, your interests, your well-being, your happiness. Put yourself first from time to time. Try it, you know. Fourth thing, do not please people. Do not people please. Observing the narcissist you can take actually everything the narcissist does and says and just reduce the temperature, and you get healthy things. Narcissism is a healthy state which had become malignant by exaggeration. Boundaries are good, narcissistic boundaries are bad. A little aggression is good, a lot of aggression is bad. Narcissism is like a caricature of a human being, but the human being is discernible there. Just imitate the narcissist without overdoing it. And you will have reached a state of health. Because remember, narcissism is healthy. We all have healthy narcissism. Everyone. Every single human being has healthy narcissism.
And we shouldn't try to just completely disavow it. We should just try to assimilate.
We are all, without healthy narcissism, you have no boundaries, no self-esteem, no self-confidence, no sense of self-worth, no grandiosity needed in order to accomplish things in life, to take on challenges. This is all emanates from your healthy narcissism, which is very good. The narcissist actually tries to compensate for a lack of healthy narcissism with a malignant variety. So observe the narcissist, imitate him as a codependent, imitate him without the overdoing, without the exaggeration, without the caricaturistic levels or dimensions of his misbehavior. Don't misbehave, behave.
And accept a little feedback once in a while.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's been a marathon session, but I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you all.
This has been great. I
Thank you.
really appreciate everything you're doing for this field and helping all of us. You've helped me, you've helped all of us. You
Thank
really
you.
have.
I've been trying for 26 years now. Okay, so go to the library, get yourself a good book, and try to forget this conversation, this trauma that you will never recover from. Okay.
All right, Sam.
Take care
very much.
there. Stay
Take care.
safe. I'm about to stop the recording and sign off. Take care.